Trial Brief with your host, David Otto.
Today on the Trial Brief, we have a real treat. We've got Stephen Haber, one of the preeminent trial lawyers here in New York. Steve, many years ago, I met maybe 30 years ago as he was on the dark side at the time doing defense work. Now has seen the light and has come over and joined the good guys. But Steve is a top-notch trial attorney, and he has developed maybe the greatest trial tool. It is the greatest trial tool available as far as I'm concerned. TimeLine Presenter, I've used it. I've worked with Steve. Stephen has second seated me on a couple of trials, and we've had some really great results. And most recently, we obtained a very large verdict in Queens a couple of months ago using this TimeLine Presenter. And I'm really, really excited that he's here to show us how this works and how it could help your practice. And I think I talked to Steve about this outside of the show, and it has other applications, and that's something we may talk about a little later. But anyway, Steve, thanks for being here. Welcome to the Trial Brief.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate the kind words of introduction. And I blush mightily, although the webcam doesn't pick it up, at the kind words you've extended. And I return the compliment too. It's a pleasure to be with you, and having sat next to you at trial, I've been really impressed with the level of preparedness that you exercise and how well you represent your clients. They are really appreciative too.
Well, thank you. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and about what you do now?
Well, I'm an old defense guy. For about 25 years was doing exclusively defense, a lot in the area of professional negligence, with the chiropractic area being pretty much almost exclusively my firm's involvement in New York. And then I decided to take on a plaintiff's case, actually, that was referred to me by a chiropractor I had represented. And we took a $3 million verdict on a podiatry malpractice case up in Orange County, and that sort of whet my appetite for doing plaintiff's work. It's funny because coming out of law school, that was really the first direction that I wanted to pursue, was plaintiff's personal injury. And I got sort of waylaid into the defense side, and now I've crossed back to, I guess, my first love, plaintiff's work. Although I still do a little defense work in the area of chiropractic, my focus is on plaintiffs and mostly in the malpractice area. And I added, actually, at the urging of one of my colleagues who I second seated on a very complex case in the Bronx, Seth Bader. He urged me to offer up the electronic presentation services that I use on my cases and have used for about 25 years. Wanted me to offer it to the bar in general. So I created a side business called yourtrialsupport.com. And in connection with that, I use the techniques for other attorneys that I've used on my cases for many years. And I find it very rewarding and a lot of fun.
Great. How did you get involved with designing or co-designing TimeLine Presenter?
Well, it's funny. I went exclusively paperless about 25 years ago. I was really one of the earlier adopters, and I saw the benefits of it. And I did a case, that $3 million verdict up in Goshen, and the jury was really captivated with the way that the electronic exhibits were presented. It made the case move, it made it interesting, they were fully engaged. And I was really struck by any time that we had oral testimony on the stand, obviously, we had exhibits to work with electronically, projected on large screen. When I go to, even back then, I went with a 100-inch diagonal screen and a digital projector. And the jury was captivated, and I knew that this was the way things had to be done going forward. So I never did a 30 by 40-inch blow up again. And it started from there. And over the period of time, I started migrating over to the iPad. I mean, the backbone of what I do is off the PC to prepare things. But ultimately, when I get to a point in time when I'm really working toward the trial phase, I go iPad only. And, like many of us, I work with TrialPad, which I like, and I still use the legacy version of it occasionally. But I found that there was a great need to have a timeline representation of the events of a case that could have in each event the capability of bringing all kinds of media in, including, obviously the PDFs of the medical records, medical research that may relate to that particular event, the different doctors who had input at that time of treatment, and to be able to categorize and be able to sort the events and still have a platform for presentation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
So
I think we know, and we've really come to accept that presentation these days is different than presentation 20 years ago. As you mentioned, blow-ups, thing of the past, charts, graphs, these kind of demonstrative aids. And we learned that, or I was lucky enough, maybe 2 years before COVID hit or so, we tried a bariatric surgery case where you helped me with the presentation of that case. And because jurors are now so accustomed to video, sound bites, everything's on their phone, everything is YouTube, everything's on social media. We have become so trained for that method of consuming information. And what you have really showed me and helped me through is how to give them that information, right? I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that people need to be shown and they need to be engaged. And I've had my share of jurors sitting there texting during trial, and it's maddening. But at the same time, you have to sort of look and see what drew that person's attention away from the case presentation. It wasn't just a text from the kid, the juror's kid's school that she had to respond to. She wasn't engaged at that moment. So we had to find a way to keep jurors' attention and also to keep building that timeline of your case story. You have to reduce your case to something that is consistent, understandable, in bite-sized nuggets, and be able to be digested visually and be engaged visually. Everybody requires it now. Oral testimony straight off on the stand is not going to fly.
Yeah. So let's take a look at Timeline Presenter and let's just see how it is engaging.
Sure. This is actually the timeline of a portion of the timeline of the case that we worked together on, the one that you tried and got that nice verdict in Queens. This was a case of failure to diagnose a very rare dental infection. And the story that we wanted to tell, and I think you did it very effectively, was the long course of treatment that this patient had that was producing no remission in symptoms. And there was a lot of gingival swelling that persisted over a long period of time that was unresponsive to antibiotics. And with the timeline like this, which is scalable, so you can see the scaling at the bottom, you can go and import all of these events, categorize them so they can be filtered for limited or truncated display, and give the jury the story. So you can see here the onset, June 6th. Then you have the course of antibiotics. So it was important to show that there was amoxicillin given, amoxicillin, clindamycin, and of course the defendant's treatment starts here on June 27th. Let's see if I can show you with it. So it started on June 27th, and then you had a course of this Dr. Lee treating this patient for a long course of treatment, intermixing a further antibiotic, Augmentin, which is a very strong antibiotic, broad spectrum. Still nothing. He did an exploratory surgery. Still no remission in symptoms. There was a biopsy, but it was a limited study in terms of tissue extraction and analysis. A CT, then we had the path report. Levaquin, another antibiotic given, as you see here, that we color-coded orange. Defendant still treating. Another path, another CT, still nothing. And ultimately what we were able to show is some visual evidence of the prior condition, the early course of treatment by the defendant on the left, and what it went to the point when the rare infection was diagnosed, which was easily found at the hospital on path. There you had it, actinomycosis. Or how would you say it? You were the expert in pronouncing it, David.
Actinomycosis.
Okay, good.
Yes.
All right. So, I mean, that's an illustration, a very brief illustration of how we work with this. But to me, it's very useful, not only as a tool for trial presentation, but it has the ability to accommodate huge amounts of medical records that give you the ability.
I want to touch on something here, because just with respect to the trial presentation itself, you could see the visual here, and I think everybody can appreciate how effective that is, but you also can embed video and demonstrative photos and other exhibits into each event.
Yeah, let me see if I can pull up for you. For example, this is a case I'm working on with Ed Milstein. This happens to have embedded videos. Now, what you're seeing here really is the controller view. These elements here to the left, the jury doesn't see. They actually see only the presentation mode, which is this. But this is the controller side. And so you can bring in videos, very large PDFs. So on a PDF, for example, let's look at something that has a PDF. This happens to be a deposition transcript, and you can create bookmarks within it to locate. And TrialPad has this option too, but this has a full functioning PDF editor with bookmarking, highlighting, annotating. So these are some of the events that were important. So these are highlighted areas. You have the ability to do pullouts, like TrialPad does. The highlighting tool you have also up here. If you happen to have a non-OCR PDF, you can do highlighting with freehand highlighting. You can redact sections. You can do freehand drawing into it. That's the bookmarking. This is a cool feature. This gives you the thumbnails of all the pages of your PDFs. You can actually change the order of PDFs or truncate this PDF into another by simply selecting pages, say these particular pages, and then you share it out and create a truncated file, call it test. Hit save. And if I want to bring it back in as an event into that, maybe it's a sub section of the transcript, hit edit, add. It has drag and drop capability to bring in documents. And just go back to on my iPad, and there's the test, and just drag it in. And there it is. Just those pages that I selected from the bigger transcript are now in there as a separate event within that, or separate slide within that event.
Right.
So it's got huge flexibility. And of course, what it has also, if you're working with OCR medical documents, any kind of documents, you have search capability by the event or across the entire timeline. So this particular one, if I want to look for the word nerve, where nerve appears, and I hit it, this happens to be medical literature, the word nerve appears. It appears 6 times in this, as you can see from the top right. back out, nerve continues to appear in the search field, and I go to the next event that has nerve. And that's happens to be the same article. Now we go here, and the word nerve appears in this particular doctor's records. So you can do searching across. The other thing that's really cool about this too, if you have a very complex timeline, I don't have one that has that depth into it, but if you have a very complex timeline that you want to break down a hospital record even further, even beyond bookmarking pages within the hospital record, you want to make a set of events just for that hospitalization. In addition to creating an event, you can create a separate timeline that is embedded in that major timeline that will break down, or you can break down that particular hospitalization even further in a searchable way. And that universal search feature will search every timeline, sub-timeline, sub-sub-timeline for the text field that you want to locate.
One of the things that I found incredibly helpful, which really made my life much easier on trial, was during cross-examination, where as I'm going through a timeline, cross-examining a doctor on a chart, on his chart, and there's a number of dates, I can go into that date, and all I'm doing is I have it on the iPad, I hit the date, and what I can pull up there is my entire cross with those documents, with whether I have his deposition transcript, notated, or annotated with yellow stickies, or Post-it notes. I have the chart. I was able to have everything in one place, and it was really, really seamless, and it was just so easy.
Yeah, it's the ability to put into each event everything that relates to that event. You can just pull, say, on a particular event, say it's a labor and delivery case, and you have an internal exam done by the OB. In that event, you want the OB's note, you want the nurse's note for that date. You want, if the tracing is being recorded, obviously you want the fetal monitor tracings. You may want additional parts of the chart that may relate to it. So you can integrate it that way. It's a great tool to be able to put all of that together and note it by event. That's what actually got me started with this. I was doing a labor and delivery case where I needed all of those elements broken down by date. And this has the ability actually to go down. So if I want to, I'll pull this out, for example, and I go to properties, I have the ability to say I change the date here. I can go all the way down to the hour, minute, and second of an event, so that I have it pinned by very discrete intervals of time. So it's got a great ability to do all of these different things together. I keep finding new and different ways to use it too. And we keep adding elements to this. I co-designed this with the owner of the app, and we go back and forth quite a bit on new features that we are adding. Some of them, one of which will be really interesting, will be doing preset filtering. So if I choose a certain set of events that I want to illustrate a particular element of the case, like, for example, your case, I wanted to pick out, the antibiotics, the defendant's treatment, the pathology, the CT, things like that. I can set presets of filtering, and it will make it maybe 3, 4, 5 different options of presets that you can jump in and out of very quickly. So it's got a lot of capability. This timeline, what I find so useful, and we did this in real time, it is a single data chunk. So in that data chunk, you have all of the case, and it is fully comprehensive. You can put every single page, video, whatever, of your entire case that you want to ultimately use at trial, but also you want to give to your expert to co-share or in our case, we were constantly syncing between the install I had on my iPad and your install. With the sharing option here, you could see that we were shared together on this data file, so that any change I make, any annotation, any bookmark, any sticky note, and we didn't look at the sticky notes, which is really cool. The sticky note feature is, I can pick out a PDF and hit edit. This one happens not to be a PDF. Let's find a PDF, edit. And the sticky note feature is really great. So you can put in the sticky note, say, for example, for that event, if you don't want the full-blown deposition transcript, you can put in the defendant's testimony by cut and paste and just put the page and line. But
I was actually using that feature for my cross-examination questions on those particular portions of the record and of the deposition transcript.
Very, very effective. That's one of the reasons we designed it, to have that capability. And you can also, as you want, you can actually drop the testimony in as another slide. So if the defendant departs from his deposition transcript on direct testimony, you have the transcript to put right up and stick it up, you know, where the sun doesn't shine. So it's a great feature. But this synchronization is amazing, and the way it's structured pricing wise with the app, the app subscription price on an annual basis for the install version, the editing version, which allows you to make all of these edits in the timeline and create timelines, that's $400 for the year. And with that, you get unlimited number of view-only installs. So you can share this with experts. You don't have to pay for an additional install, but you can give them the app and the data access to the data file, which gets synchronized through iCloud, and they are totally on board with everything that's happening in the case. So it's not an instance where, you know, the expert says, well, send me the case materials, and you send them, you know, a pile this big, and you get a bill that's even bigger for review of stuff. This gives them the ability to find what they need to actually understand the case. I mean, we well know that 99% of hospital records are basically repetition, especially now with EMR being so frequent, a situation where you get repetitive imaging studies, you know, in a chart that makes the chart so large, it's really unmanageable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's pretty clear how helpful this is at trial. I mean, it's really, it was so helpful that in our case, while the jury was deliberating, and they sent back some questions for the court, one of the questions was that they wanted to see this timeline. I mean, that shows you the impact it had on this jury.
Well, that's the way things are going. You know, it's interesting. TrialPad, Litsoft, that does TrialPad, they have now a new app that they offer for free, which will take on the PDFs and other imaging that you have on a case in a format that's designed for the jury to be handed the iPad to have all of the case materials, so they can look at it together without actually having physical paper. Nice idea. I mean, I would have gladly given them the my iPad during deliberation, but of course, you know, I have a lot of stuff embedded in this presentation that would not necessarily be proper for them to have.
Sure.
Of course, I could easily, just like TrialPad would do, I could easily produce the same timeline, but take out the annotations and the highlighting and such if counsel objected. But it's a great tool, and it's a lot of fun to work with.
One thing we haven't touched on, I mean, we could see what a great tool this is at trial, how easy it and seamless it is, and it really is great. But one thing that I think has to be noted is this is a great trial preparation tool. I found that as we were accumulating the documents and we were sorting it out and we were putting the timeline together, it was invaluable as a trial preparation tool.
Yeah, we are marketing it, and using it in my own practice as basically a platform for storing all of the case materials from the very outset of a case. I'm not so interested in the pleadings, the bill of particulars, although that stuff can be placed in as PDFs and be usable in that fashion. But when I start building a case, I've got cases that are very early on. Let's see if I can pick out one. I mean, this happens to be a defense case for me, but this is very early on, and I've already started building it from day one in the timeline. And of course, I've got imaging imported. I've got all kinds of stuff in here that is useful. Here's a case that just recently settled by my co-defendant. And also, this is something that was built from the very beginning of the case. So I really encourage it to be used in that fashion. I mean, walking into deposition with all of the records in this fashion, knowing what care preceded what did a doctor know at a particular time? What would have been available, say, in a situation of a failure to diagnose a medical condition that would have been shown on an MRI, and you happen to have a timeline, you say, well, there was an MRI done 3 months before this particular doctor's treatment, and you would be informed of that, having this already built out and set up for you to make reference to. It's a one-stop shop thing. And this, as I say, is shareable, but it's also back-upable. You can back up this whole thing really fast. I mean, if you use AirDrop on this, which is the way I back up some of my stuff when I'm working on cases, rather than bog down my PC with big backups, and a lot of these backups are about 1 gig in size, you can throw it on your phone through AirDrop, and it's super fast to back up. If you need to do that. It obviously is backed up to the cloud too, automatically. And later versions of this, we're going to have it set so that it can call upon even your private cloud server to have as the synchronization centerpiece between installs. So it can be set up that way quite easily. That may be an early new version that may be coming out. So it's very flexible.
How can someone get Timeline Presenter, and how could they contact you?
Well, just go to the Apple App Store, put in Timeline Presenter, and you'll get the download. It's a 2-week free trial. You can install it as an editable version, so you pay the fee for it. It's well worth a try, and I'm available. With courts being shut down as much as they are. I mean, I'm coming up close now to a string of trials that are happening, both mine and other cases that I'm doing with other attorneys. But there's always some availability to do even a group training on how to do this. I mean, you got a sense of how to bring in documents when I did that truncation of that PDF of that transcript, but it's really easy to work with and a lot of fun, actually. I mean, I'm sort of a tech nerd from way back when, and I enjoy seeing how technology can help you. So I'd be happy to demo it for anybody who'd be interested in seeing it, and give some instruction. I've worked actually pretty extensively with Charlie Rock, who loves it. You can see his review up on the Apple App Store. And David, you have, I think, a small review up there, and I appreciate the kind comments you made in your very good trial instruction text that has come out. And I'm a big fan of that book, so I'm giving you a plug too.
Well, Stephen, congratulations on this. This is really I mean, look, we use Game Changer a lot, maybe too much for things. But for me, at least, when I'm not trying a case, going through a yellow pad and going through documents to find things, and I have everything right at my disposal like this, you see the results. And thank you for that. And
my great pleasure.
We'll have you back for an update one of these days, and good luck with your upcoming trials.
And I wish you good luck with your upcoming trials, and everybody out there to get back into court. And maybe we'll have to start doing remote trials. in Washington State and in Texas, they are doing remote jury trials. Not the ideal thing, but how many more variants do we have to see before we go in that direction?
Well, hopefully we're done with that. But
yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. And
Take
be
care.
well. We'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Take care. My pleasure.
On behalf of David, once again, thank you for listening to this episode. Please take a moment to subscribe and give us a rating at Apple Podcasts. We'll see you next time on The Trial Brief.